would run and no pressure would ever build up. Now what I was doing here was just checking the inlet valve. Before you even put paint in your machine, put your finger or a nice safe thing like I saw there, I showed you a pin, and make sure that inlet valve moves. This is the outlet valve. This is less likely to foul up, but it can. And this is, as the paint is pushed into the hose, this maintains the pressure, keeps the paint from coming backwards into the pump. When your pump's running and doesn't stop, that's because pressure has not built up. The pressure switch is in that black section to the left of the valve that I'm screwing on now. You can't really see it at this point. Now in this case I had a frozen piston. The pump would run and run and run and take longer and longer for it to build up pressure and shut off. And eventually I found out that the piston was frozen in its sleeve and wouldn't move. Here's the wobble plate, or the nutating plate. And this wobble is converts to a back and forth motion to drive the piston in and out. It's a nice piece of hardware here, a needle bearing plate. And then there'll be another sliding plate that goes over it. The purpose behind this is to let this item spin against another object to make it work in and out without doing a constant rubbing and friction that will wear out the nylon part that you'll see later. Now here I'm installing it again, nice and packed up with grease. Ideally you should clean all the grease off and put new grease on. As you can see, I'm lazy, so I got some of the factory white grease and I'm putting some moly grease on. Not promptly cleaning out my machine after I use it is the reason I get in these fix anyway. So learn from my mistakes. Take your machine completely apart. Not to this point, but make sure all the fluids are out. Take apart the gun completely, and I'd even pull out the inlet and the outlet valve. You can see the wire going from the pressure switch back to the motor. The top hole receives the bearing shaft from the motor. It's nice and heavy duty. And the bottom hole is where the piston's going to go in, and it's got a nice big fat brass or bronze sleeve. Now in this case I had paint slowly get between the sleeve and the piston and stayed there, and it formed a kind of a gum, and it got to the point with heat that it froze up the piston. So I actually had to use a torch around the outside portion here on the aluminum housing, and then I was able to just get vice grips on the end of the piston and get it out after about 30 seconds of heat. This piston's very, very hard metal. I was very impressed. Even using vice grips on it, didn't leave any scratches or marks. Should slide in quite easily. On the inlet valve area, here's what it looks like fully inserted. That white stuff is a combination of old paint and corrosion from not being fully dried after use. Now here's the spring plate goes in. And then here's the, I'll call it the rocker device. The wobble plate's going to push against the upper part and cause the piston to go in and out. And you can see here now that it freely moves. When it was frozen, everything would spin and things were just flexing, but the piston was not moving. Now as I put the housing back on, there's a little bit of spring pressure for the last 1/8 of an inch or so. There's the number 10 torque screw, or I should say it's a screw that takes a number 10 Torx tool. Tighten them all up good, and like doing a head gasket or something, go around and check them all again. Here's the access hole that you can see. You can fire the motor up briefly when it's just in this state and look and see if the piston's moving in and out, and see if you had the frozen piston problem that I did. Here's the inlet valve. This is the number one problem I mentioned before. It sticks. There's the little white tool on the base that comes with the pump. I put a little lubrication on here, little Vaseline or something of that nature. I'd avoid silicone whenever possible because you don't want that contaminating the paint. It's just hand tight with the tool. Now the reservoir just slips over, and the two O-rings prevent all the leaking. And that's what it looks like when it's fully seated. Putting the hose back on. Now attaching this to the pump assembly to the reservoir with the 4 screws. Attaching the base with the 4 screws. The 2 shorter screws are closer to you as you watch it, and the 2 longer screws farther away. That's about it, folks. We're going to flip it over, put the handle back on with a wing nut and a nut. Power it on, make sure it runs.